Claude responded, I told my daughter I was broke on a Thursday evening in October. I told my daughter I was broke on a Thursday evening in October. Not with tears, not with my voice cracking, none of the theater a weaker man might have reached for. I told her the way you tell someone a fact that has already settled into your bones, calm, across the porch table, with my hands wrapped around a glass of sweet tea going warm in the evening air. I said, Rachel, I need to be straight with you. The dealership is gone. What's left in savings won't carry me through the winter. I'm going to have to sell this farm. I watched her face. And my daughter, my 41-year-old daughter, who I had raised in that farmhouse, who had learned to drive a tractor in that back field before she could parallel park a car, who had sat across from me at that same porch table every Sunday she wasn't working a shift, said 4 words before she could stop herself. She said, "About damn time, Dad." And then she caught it. She rearranged her face into something meant to look like sympathy. She said she didn't mean it like that. She said she just meant it was probably a relief to finally let it go. She said she wanted to help me figure it out. She talked for almost 5 minutes in that careful, managed voice of someone trying to walk a sentence back after it's already landed on the table between you. But I had heard it, clean and unguarded, the way truth sounds right before a person remembers they're supposed to hide it. About damn time. I was not broke. I had not lost the dealership. My savings were fine, better than fine. I had been testing her, and she had just failed it in the one way a test can't be unfailed, which is when the real answer comes out of your mouth before you even know you've been asked the question. What I found out 3 days later, sitting in my truck outside her own house, was worse than those 4 words. Worse by a distance I'm still measuring. Hey there, neighbor. Grab a seat if you've got a minute, because this one's going to take a while, and I want you here for the whole thing. My name's Walter Higgins. I'm 67 years old, and I've lived my whole life in a town called Millbrook, Kentucky, on 86 acres my own father bought with cash he'd saved for 11 years working the rail line. I built a used car and truck dealership on the edge of town back in 1988, started with a gravel lot and 6 vehicles I'd bought at auction with money I didn't really have, and grew it over 34 years into something with 2 lots, 14 employees, and a reputation across 3 counties for selling honest trucks to honest people at a fair price. That reputation is worth more to me than most of what's in my bank account, and that's saying something, because there's more in that account than anybody in my family knows about, including the daughter who's about to become the center of this story. My wife Carol passed 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer, caught late, gone in under a year. She ran the books for the dealership for almost 3 decades, and losing her felt like losing the half of my brain that remembered where everything was filed. After she died, I kept the dealership running another 4 years, mostly because I didn't know how to be a man who didn't go into that office every morning. And then 2 years ago, I sold it to a regional auto group that had been circling us since before Carol got sick. They paid me a number that surprised even me. I'll tell you that number before this story's done, because it matters to everything that happens after. Rachel is my only daughter, 41 years old, lives 25 minutes away in Bardstown, works as a marketing director for a company that sells kitchen renovation packages to homeowners who can't really afford them. She's smart in the specific way that makes a person good at convincing people to want things they don't need. And she is charming in a way that has made it harder for me to see her clearly than it probably should have, because a father wants to believe the charm is just personality and not something aimed. My son, her younger brother Michael, is 36, lives in Lexington, works as a physical therapist at the VA hospital, calls me every single Sunday night at 7 o'clock because that's the schedule he set for himself 9 years ago and has never once broken, except the time he called 40 minutes late to apologize because he'd been holding the hand of a patient who was dying and didn't feel right stepping out. Michael is the kind of man who apologizes for being late to a phone call because he was comforting a dying stranger, and that tells you nearly everything you need to know about my son. Michael didn't know about the test. I need to be clear about that from the start. Nobody knew, not my accountant, not my lawyer, not my hunting buddy Ray Delacroix, who I've known since we were both 19, and who I eventually told everything, but only after it was already finished. The test was mine alone, built quietly over the better part of a summer, because something had been building up in me long enough that I needed to know, one way or the other, whether what I suspected about my daughter was real before I did anything about it. What I'd noticed had started small, the way these things always do. A comment Rachel made in passing about the farm, how it was an awful lot of land for one man rattling around alone, how the value of riverfront acreage in this county had about tripled since Carol's family first cleared it. How had I thought about what I wanted done with it long term? A question about the dealership sale, whether the money had come as a lump sum or spread out over years. A conversation with Michael where he mentioned, almost like it was nothing, that Rachel had called him just to check in on how Dad seemed to be doing financially since Mom passed, just making sure everybody was on the same page. Michael hadn't thought anything of that call. Michael rarely thought anything of what Rachel did, because Michael had spent his whole life giving his older sister the benefit of the doubt in that particular way a younger sibling does, a generosity Rachel had been spending freely without ever once paying back. I found it unusual. I found the whole pattern of small financial questions unusual. The way a man who built something out of a gravel lot notices patterns before he's even given them a name. And once I'd named it, I couldn't unname it. So I built the test. I had my accountant draw up a single document, a plausible but entirely fictional financial picture, one that told the story of a dealership sale gone sideways, 2 years of drawing down savings just to stay afloat, a current situation that wasn't destitute but was thin enough that selling the farm would look like the only sensible conclusion to anybody looking at it clean. That document wasn't for Rachel. It was for me, so that when I sat across from her, I'd have the numbers straight enough in my own head to sound consistent and true. I called her on a Tuesday and asked if she'd come out to the farm Thursday for supper, just the two of us, since Michael was up in Lexington. She said, of course, and she showed up right on time, which Rachel always did whenever she suspected something might be happening. We ate on the porch the way we always did in the fall before it got too cold for it. Cleared the plates, sat back down with sweet tea, the way we'd been doing on that same porch, since she was old enough to hold a glass without spilling it. And then I told her, the dealership's gone. What's left won't get me through winter. I'm going to have to sell the farm. About damn time, Dad. 4 words, unguarded, true. The 5 minutes of scrambling that followed were almost more revealing than the words themselves, because I could watch her doing the arithmetic in real time, the calculation of what she'd just let slip, the decision to fold it back into something she could live with having said, the performance of concern rolling in right behind it like a second wave chasing the first. I have spent 34 years watching people do math on the price of a truck they're trying not to look too eager about, and Rachel was doing that same math fast. But not fast enough that I couldn't see the gears turning underneath. We sat another hour after that. She was warm and helpful and practical, everything a daughter's supposed to be when her father hands her hard news. She said she'd start looking into options for me. She said not to rush into anything. She said she knew a realtor, a good one, who could tell us what riverfront land like this was actually worth if that's the road we decided to go down, she said we. I told her I appreciated that. I thanked her for driving out. I walked her to her car and stood in the gravel drive and watched her taillights disappear down the county road, and then I went back inside and sat at my own kitchen table for a long while before I finally went to bed. I want you to sit with the space between that Thursday night and what happened 3 days later, because that space is where this story turns into something I hadn't been prepared to be sitting with, even after those 4 words on the porch. I'd thought the test was finished Thursday night. I thought what I needed to know was just whether Rachel would say something true the second the news landed, whether the mask would slip enough that I could see what was underneath it, and it had, and I'd believe that was the whole shape of what I was dealing with. I was wrong about the shape. What happened Sunday afternoon showed me the rest of it. If you're still with me, tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight, because this next part is the part that changed everything for me, and I want to know I'm not carrying it alone. Every Sunday, before Michael's evening call, I drive into Bardstown to drop off a box of tomatoes and squash from the garden at Rachel's house, a habit I picked up after Carol died because it gave me somewhere to be on Sundays that wasn't just an empty farmhouse. Rachel usually isn't even home when I come by. I've got a key. I let myself in the side door. I set the box on the kitchen counter. Sometimes I water her ferns if they're looking sorry for themselves, and I leave. It's a small thing. It's mine. That Sunday, I pulled into her driveway around 4 in the afternoon, and her car was there, which was unusual for that hour, and I could hear her voice carrying from the open kitchen window before I'd even gotten out of my truck. She was on the phone, and she had that particular clipped business voice she uses with people she's not bothering to perform warmth for, the voice I'd only ever heard her use with contractors trying to overcharge her. I sat in my truck with the box of tomatoes on the seat beside me, and I listened, because something in the tone of it stopped my hand on the door handle before I'd even decided to stop. She said, "So it's confirmed, he told me Thursday night, he's selling." A pause. I know. Listen, before he gets a realtor involved, I want us positioned already. 86 acres, river frontage, that farmhouse, in this market that's moving at 11, maybe 12, if we stage it right. Another pause. Dad's not going to know the difference. He hasn't sold real estate in his life. He sold trucks. If we come in at 850, present it like a fair offer from a family friend, he signs, and we flip it inside 6 months for close to 300,000 clear. I sat in my truck with my hands in my lap and did not move. She said, "The dealership money. I'm still working that angle. I need to see the actual closing paperwork, because he made it sound like it barely covered what he owed, which means there's probably more sitting somewhere. And if he needs somebody managing it, I want to be the one he calls." Another pause, and her voice went quieter, but the window carried it clean across the driveway. "Michael's not going to be a problem. Michael trusts me. He always has. I'll handle Michael. I'll handle Michael, my son. The one who calls every Sunday at 7 without fail. The one who apologized for running 40 minutes late because he was holding a dying man's hand. I'll handle Michael." I sat there in that truck with a box of garden tomatoes going warm on the seat beside me, and I felt something in the center of my chest go very quiet, the particular quiet that settles in when something you'd only suspected turns solid, gets edges and weight and a name. The name wasn't a legal word. It was simpler than that. The word was betrayal. Not the dramatic kind you see in a courtroom drama, but the plain, domestic kind, the kind where a person who's supposed to love you has been looking at you and seeing an opportunity, quietly building a plan around that opportunity for longer than you want to know, until she's got a number in her head and a partner on the other end of the phone and a strategy for handling her own brother like he's a line item. I didn't go inside. I couldn't. Not right then. I put the truck in reverse and backed out slow and quiet before she could hear the gravel under my tires. And I drove home with that box of tomatoes still sitting on the seat, and I didn't touch a single one of them for 2 days. Monday morning, I called a lawyer. Not Rachel's realtor friend, not anybody connected to her at all. A woman named Diane Osterman, whose office sits above the hardware store on Main Street in Bardstown, who Ray Delacroix's son had used 2 years back when his own divorce got ugly over property lines. I told Diane everything, start to finish. The fictional financial picture, the 4 words on the porch, the phone call through the kitchen window. She listened without saying a word until I was finished. "Mr. Higgins," she said, "I need to ask you one thing first. Do you have documentation of what the dealership actually sold for?" "I've got the complete closing paperwork," I said, "and an accountant who's kept my books for 22 years. "Good," she said. "And the conversation you overheard Sunday, did you record any of it?" I hadn't even thought to, sitting there in that truck. She was quiet on the line for a moment. "That's all right," she said. 4 words on a porch, combined with what you overheard, and the documented reality of your finances, gives us a clear enough picture even without a recording. What I want to do is build a complete asset statement, signed, notarized, filed. So there's no version of this where the real numbers are up for debate later. And I want your estate documents revised before your daughter takes another step, because from what you've described, she's already moving on a timeline. "How soon can I come in?" I asked her. "Tomorrow morning," she said. 8 o'clock. I was sitting in her waiting room at 7:45. Diane, in person, was exactly what her phone voice had promised, precise, unhurried, the specific calm of a woman who'd walked families through this exact situation enough times to know every step without needing to rush a single one of them. She had a yellow legal pad and asked me to tell her everything again in order, and she wrote it all down in small, even handwriting that covered the page without wasted space. The numbers once Diane had my accountant on the phone by mid-morning, were substantial. The dealership sale, $1.9 million, part cash at closing and part in a 4-year earnout, the first 18 months of which had already paid out. The farm itself, appraised independently that same week at $940,000. Retirement accounts and investments Carol and I had built quietly over 3 decades. Another $700,000, all told, close to $3,400,000 in assets, held by a man his own daughter believed was so broke he'd sign his family's land over to a stranger for $850,000. I want you to sit with that gap for a second, the way I had to. $850,000, offered as a friendly fair price on land worth $940,000, which Rachel already knew, because she'd said 11, maybe 12 on the phone herself. $90,000 minimum spread in her favor before she'd even flipped it, and closer to $300,000 once she did, all built on the assumption that a grieving, trusting father wouldn't think to get his own appraisal. Diane revised my estate over the following 4 days, and I want to tell you plainly what changed and what didn't, because both matter to how this ends. What didn't change was Michael's share. Nothing I'd learned that week changed a single honest thing about my relationship with my son, and his portion stayed exactly what it had always been, earned and given freely. What changed was Rachel's, not erased. I want to be precise about that, because this was never about punishing her. It was about accuracy, about the document finally reflecting the relationship as it actually was, instead of the one she'd been quietly constructing in her direction. Her share was restructured to account for money I'd already given her over the years in loans she'd never once repaid and support she'd never once acknowledged, and it left her something, but not what she'd been positioning to take. The farm itself went into a trust, with Diane as independent trustee, unable to be sold without her written approval and a fresh independent appraisal, and no family member permitted to serve as buyer or as the buyer's agent on any transaction touching that land. Michael was named co-trustee. I called him the evening the papers were filed and told him everything. He was quiet, a long moment on the line, and then he said, "Dad, you didn't have to put me in that position." I said, "I know. That's exactly why it means something." He made a sound that was half a laugh, the small, real kind. The documents were signed and filed on a Friday afternoon, 9 days after that Thursday supper on the porch, when I told my daughter I was broke, and she told me it was about damn time before she could stop herself. Saturday morning, I called Rachel. "If you're still here with me, tell me down in the comments what you'd have said in that phone call, because how I finally told her is the part of this whole story. I spent the longest getting right in my own head before I ever picked up the phone. She answered on the first ring, the way she'd been answering every call all week, which told me she'd been watching that phone a little closer than she usually bothered to. "Dad," she said, warm, immediate. "How are you holding up? I've been thinking about you." "I'm doing just fine," I said. "I wanted to bring you up to speed on some things. Can you come out to the farm this afternoon?" "Of course," she said. "Absolutely. What time?" I told her 3. She pulled into the drive at 10 till. She came in wearing that same practiced warmth she'd had on since Thursday night, the easy helpfulness of somebody who believes the situation is still moving her direction. She sat down at the porch table. I set a glass of tea in front of her and sat across from her the way I had 9 days before. "Rachel," I said, "I want to tell you something true before I tell you the rest of it. I love you. That doesn't change no matter what I say next, and I need you to hear that part first, so everything after it lands the right way." She looked at me, and something shifted across her face, small and involuntary, the beginning of understanding that this wasn't the conversation she'd driven out here expecting. "I was never broke," I said. "The dealership sale went fine. The savings are more than fine, and this farm is not being sold to anybody, under any circumstances, you're going to have a hand in." Silence. Her hands went flat on the table. "I told you I was broke because I needed to find something out," I said. "And you told me before you could stop yourself from telling me." 4 words. "Rachel." That's all it took. She didn't say anything. I kept going. "And Sunday afternoon, when you were on the phone in your own kitchen, your window was open, same as mine's always been. I heard every word of it." Her face went the particular pale of somebody rapidly running back through a recent memory and realizing it doesn't land the way they need it to. Dad, she said, the land's worth more than you think. I've got an independent appraisal from this week, I said. 940. You were going to offer me 850 as a favor from a friend. I know the number because you said it yourself, on the phone, while I was sitting in my own truck in your driveway with a box of tomatoes. She didn't try to deny it. I'll give her that much. She sat there looking at the glass of tea in front of her and didn't try to construct some version of the afternoon where what I'd just told her wasn't true, and that told me something about my daughter I hadn't been sure of until that exact moment, that underneath all the calculating, there was still somebody in there who knew when the calculating was over. The estate's been revised and filed, I told her. Diane Osterman handled it. The farm's in a trust with an independent trustee, and the terms make what you were planning impossible now. I paused. Michael's the co-trustee. She closed her eyes. Did you tell Michael? She asked. I told Michael everything, I said, including the part where you said you'd handle him. She opened her eyes and looked down at the table for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost most of what had been holding it up. Are you going to cut me out completely? She said. It wasn't really a question. I want to tell you what I told your brother when he asked me what I needed from him, I said. I need the truth, not a managed version of it. What's actually going on with you, the real shape of it? Because I think what I heard through that window on Sunday came from somebody in over her head who's been looking at her own father as a way out instead of somebody she could ask for help. And those aren't the same thing. One of those I can work with. The other one I can't. She looked at me for a long moment. Are you in trouble? I asked her. Real trouble? The pause had weight to it. Yes, she finally said. Tell me, I said. And she did. Not all at once, and not clean, the way truth comes out after it's been folded up small and carried around too long, in stops and starts, losing the thread and finding it again. A renovation financing side business she'd started 2 years back with money borrowed against her house, promising homeowners kitchen remodels through her marketing contacts and taking deposits up front, a business that had collapsed when 2 contractors she'd trusted disappeared with the money mid-project, leaving her personally on the hook to homeowners threatening to sue and a private lender charging her interest she couldn't keep up with. She wasn't broke, not yet, but she was close enough to see it clearly, and the distance between where she stood and where she needed to be had made my land look like a bridge she could walk across without anybody noticing. I listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When she finished, I sat with it a minute. You should have called me, I said. She looked at the table. Not to take something from me, I said. To ask. There's a version of this where you called me 8 months ago and said, Dad, I'm in real trouble and I need help. And we'd have had a different 8 months than the ones we just had. I paused. I don't know if I'd have said yes. I want to be honest with you about that. What you were planning here, the number you had, the way you were building it around your own brother, that tells me something about your judgment I'm still sitting with. But I'd have listened. We'd have had the conversation. Rachel put her hand over her eyes and sat like that a moment. Dad, she said, I'm sorry. I looked at my daughter, 41 years old, with her mother's stubborn chin and a business gone bad and a plan that had gone worse, and the specific, tired look of somebody who's been carrying 2 different versions of the truth long enough that just carrying them has become its own weight. I know you are, I said. The will, she said. What you changed, it's accurate, I said. It reflects things the way they actually stand. If that changes in the years ahead, I'll revisit it. Because I'm not interested in punishing you. I'm interested in the truth. But the truth starts today, and the truth is that what you were planning wasn't something a daughter does to a father who trusts her. She nodded, slow. Where do I even start? She asked. With your own lawyer, I said. Tomorrow, before anything else. And you tell them the whole picture, not the managed one. She nodded again. And then you call your brother? I said. Not me calling to tell him what you said about him. You call him yourself. She looked at the table a long moment. He's going to be furious, she said. Yes, I said. He's going to be furious, And then he's going to listen, because Michael's always been better at both those things than either one of us ever gave him credit for. Rachel left around 5:30. I stood at the porch rail and watched her taillights go down the county road, same as they had 9 days before, and then I stood there a while longer, looking out at the fields, going soft gray in the evening light. The old fence line Carol used to walk along with her coffee every morning before the sun got too hot. I called Michael. He picked up on the second ring. I told him she was going to call. He was quiet a moment. "How'd she seem when she left?" he asked. "Like somebody who set down something heavy," I said, "and isn't sure yet what to do with her hands now that they're empty." Michael made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "That sounds about right for her," he said. "Yes," I said, "it does." We talked another half hour about other things, about his work at the VA, about a fishing trip we'd been putting off for 2 years, about the fence line his mother used to walk that I told him was finally starting to lean bad in a couple places and needed fixing before winter. When we hung up, I sat out on the porch a good while longer in the chair Carol used to take in the evenings, and I looked out at those 86 acres and thought about how the land was still mine, the documents were accurate, and the number my daughter had been planning to offer me would never appear on any sheet of paper anywhere, because the trust made that whole conversation impossible now. I didn't know what was coming next for Rachel. That was hers to work out with her own lawyer, and with her brother, and with the real shape of her finances, once the managed version finally got put away for good. I'd told her plainly what I could work with and what I couldn't. The rest was up to her. What I did know was this. The test I'd built had cost me more than I'd bargained on, not in dollars, but in the particular way that clear sight always costs more than staying blind, because staying blind lets you keep the version of your family you'd rather believe in, and clear sight makes you live with the version that's actually true. Rachel had failed the test, and then, sitting at that porch table on a Saturday afternoon, she'd done something the test was never built to measure, which was tell me the truth when the truth was the only thing left in her hands, without managing it, without softening it into something easier to swallow. That wasn't nothing. It wasn't forgiveness either. But it wasn't nothing. I went inside. I fed the barn cats. I made myself supper and ate it, sitting down at the kitchen table, which I don't always bother doing anymore. And I thought about a woman who'd kept the books at that dealership for 28 years with a patience I never once managed to match, who probably would have seen straight through all of Rachel's questions about the land long before I ever noticed the pattern. Carol would have handled it different than I did, I expect. Less strategy, more straight talk. She'd probably have been right too. But she wasn't here to do it her way, and I'd done it the only way I knew how, which was to build something solid, make sure it held, and get the truth down on paper, where nobody could argue with it later. The truth was down on paper now. It held. That was enough for one Saturday. If this one stayed with you, tell me down in the comments which part changed something in you while you were listening, and where you're listening in from tonight. And if you've ever had somebody close to you ask one too many questions about what you've got and what you're planning to do with it, let me leave you with something. A man who built a business out of a gravel lot learned the hard way on a porch in October. You don't need a hidden camera, and you don't need a recording. You just need to give somebody one honest chance to answer before they remember. They're supposed to be careful, and the truth will walk itself right out into the open every single time. Claude responded, "You already have this one same request came through just before. You already have this one same request came through just before." Here it is again, freshly worded so it doesn't just repeat itself. What Walter learned on that porch wasn't really about money at all. It was that you can love someone fully and still hold your ground. That clarity and compassion aren't opposites. Sometimes protecting the people we love means telling them the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. The door stayed open. That's the part worth keeping close. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI, purely for entertainment, though we hope its life lesson finds a warm place with you too.